Please welcome CEO MMGY Global, Clayton Reid.
Hi, listen, today I want to spend some time trying to dispossess you of some of the assumptions you have about travelers. Some of the stereotypes that are made, I think, generally in our industry that cause maybe some misguided thinking. But I thought I'd start with an example. For years, we have seen the incidence of drowning and ice cream consumption move in lockstep. When ice cream consumption goes down, drowning goes down. When it comes back up, drowning comes back up. Why? Do people grieve when people drown by eating ice cream? Do they eat too quickly, go into the water too quickly after they eat? If you don't look behind the obvious, you don't realize it has nothing to do with cause and effect. It's a corollary called summer. And I think that's an example of where if you don't follow the data and look beyond the obvious, you might end up going down a rabbit hole. Today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how I don't believe the travel industry in general understands millennials. I think as a result of that, we generally misunderstand our customers and don't look deep enough at who our customers are. I also think that today, more than any other moment in travel marketing, we have the ability to understand our customer better. And I think going forward, as you heard a little bit from the roundtable earlier, and as you will hear again later this afternoon, those who put their head around that are going to win. So the good news is that we are going to have a record year in the travel industry next year. We have been tracking travel demand for 25 years. You can see what it looks like back from 2007 in the first quarter and what it looks like going into the first quarter of next year. The good news is I think you have permission to raise rates next year, and I think we expect demand generators to be very positive. If you buy into the narrative today, it starts and stops only with millennials. This guy's driving all the demand. He and his friends. It's right there, right? But if you look at the research, it tells you that on the leisure side especially, it's across the board demand is up. That it's not just about millennials. Moreover, it's not about the narrative generally it's attached to millennials. That everybody, more than 8 in 10, are saying they want to travel more. Who in the room's a millennial? Raise your hand if you're a millennial. One of three things is going on here. You don't know what a millennial is. It's 18 to 34-year-olds, by the way. It actually includes 16 and 17-year-olds too, but we're not going to talk about that today. The second thing that might be going on here is you're a little older than that, but you don't want to admit it. Some of you 39 and 40-year-olds raised your hand. But I'm going to suggest there's a third, more pervasive item, and that is that millennials resent the tag of millennials. That there are many who do not believe or espouse that what a millennial is what they want to admit to be. It looks a little bit like this.
Millennials, there are 80 million of them, 19 to 34 years old, swarming the US of A and leaving nothing but selfie sticks and gluten-free pizza crusts in their wake.
Time magazine called you lazy, entitled narcissists who are part of the me generation.
40% of millennials said cereal was too inconvenient of a food choice for them.
Most millennials would rather deal with a computer, iPad, iPhone than actually have interaction with another human being.
They're not altruistic and as much as self-entitled.
Lazy and locally ignorant generation actually possess idea.
They're not lazy, but they sure do seem demanding. And millennials don't get off the couch very often.
That's a ridiculous narrative. It's ridiculous that it's become pervasive in consumer marketplace, and it's also ridiculous that we as marketers many times follow that to its conclusion. It's like if you were a Justin Timberlake fan when he was Frosted Tips in a boy band, and then he was the same guy when he became JT and was a tastemaker and actor, or he's the same guy now as a parent. He was a millennial in every stage of that evolution. But you think he doesn't buy differently along those three stages? You think he doesn't travel differently, think about travel differently along those three stages? Maybe that's a simple example, but the truth is we tend to put stereotypes against many of our traveling audiences. Millennials is the largest cohort in the United States today. It is a fourth of the population. But over 20% of millennials make less than $50,000 of household income and really have no meaningful impact on the travel economy. So you have to parse some of what you believe, what you hear about millennials. We as marketers are spending more and more money against this monolithic group. And I would categorize that in some ways as a rabbit hole, unless you're specifically looking at the behaviors themselves. So it's not just about this guy. It's as much about these guys, a millennial family that is moving more towards what the previous generation did, that's moving more towards what their parents did, that travels in more traditional ways, that actually might mow the lawn at some point and live in the suburbs. It's this narrative that even you'll see, she's having a baby. Kevin Bacon, he rolls his eyes at the idea that this would ever be him, moving into that next stage of his life. But the reality is, that's what happens in this massive group of young people, that their behaviors vary so dramatically from the time they're young to the time they progress through their life. For example, families spend a lot more money in the millennial cohort than the couples do. It's significant. If you're trying to target the real heavy-use millennial travelers, you're looking heavily at families. And God forbid we think millennials take staycations. Almost half of millennial families say they take a vacation, so it's a staycation. So it's not necessarily about sleeping on the floor of the jungle in Brazil. It may very well likely be staying in a Wyndham Garden Inn in Omaha, a couple hours from home. That is not a narrative that is typically applied to this group. Even with business travelers in the millennial cohort are now the largest segment of business travelers, 19.1 million of them. But that's less than 25% of millennials. Would it surprise you to know that millennials, when they choose to stay in a hotel on business travel, those that are frequent business travelers, those that make up the 19.1 million, don't choose a hotel location based on proximity to where their meeting is, and they don't pick a hotel based on accommodation or appointment in that hotel. They pick it based on location and proximity to the things they want to do when they're in that market, which is a little bit different if you dig into the data. Even the research we released last year that talked about how millennials are using bricks and mortar travel agents at a higher rate than any other age cohort. In fact, Jason, I think we debated this. This was controversial at the time. But if you really dig down on which millennials are traveling, you find out that they actually have a high propensity to use bricks and mortar retail travel agents. For obvious reasons, they're less experienced travelers. They want somebody to help them through the travel planning process. But again, you have to understand what that swath of traveler is. You can't apply a broad thinking to that audience. It would be like suggesting that everyone in the 70s, when they were young, was part of the Woodstock generation. My dad wasn't part of the Woodstock generation. He was young at that time. I'm sure there are lots of examples. I think we make the same mistake with today's young people. So I say to you, instead of continually applying these stereotypical tags to young people, we start thinking about microsegments, and we start thinking about specific behaviors that are relevant for our business. Maybe an example that helps us jump off into this conversation is to think about life cycle and travel. So it looks a little bit like this. Young people, when they first start traveling, are at what we call the early stage. They're investigating. They're not sure what they want to do. They're definitely a moving target. But quickly as they get older, they start to figure it out. They follow specific patterns. They create their own taste. They might start even creating a little bit of loyalty around what they like to do. And then again, as they progress through, now they've maybe got a family, and they're more rooted in a traditional mindset. They're predictable. Again, as I said earlier, they're starting to follow patterns of previous generations that don't necessarily fit what they were doing when they were younger. And just to bring it full circle, now we look at older Gen Xers and matures, and we realize they're returning to a behavior that mirrors very much what the very early stagers are doing. They now have discretionary time and money, and they're starting to travel like they did when they were young, going places they haven't been before, real time to explore. So just as a general narrative, you think about that, I think it's still important to understand that no one's exactly the same. And today, people in the travel industry create not only marketing programs, but they create products and they create service levels that tend to follow that generic narrative. And when we know that not everybody's the same, it gives you an opportunity to think about, all right, what are ways we can create microsegments? And I'm going to share with you a few I brought today just as an example. So one, if you really are after a young, affluent traveler, we call those Henrys, high earners, not yet rich, right? So they are wealthy, in terms of disposable income. They haven't saved a lot of money. They're young, and they're a perfect market if you want to attract a tastemaker. But maybe you're a shoulder season brand, or you need to drive shoulder season business, and you want to go after a micro segment like Gotta Go Solos. People who are married with children in the household but travel on their own. My favorite of those the guys came up with is called Yahtzees. Young at heart, traveling, zooming enthusiastically, Yahtzees. It's a tough one. These are matures who have a lot of discretionary time and money and who are spending it. It's going to be 12% of US travelers in very short order. Or maybe you're a fit brand. Maybe you want to identify the ethos of outdoor enthusiast. So you target a micro segment like jet sweaters. These are amateur athletes who travel without their families to do their own athletic endeavors. It's a huge market, 10% of US travelers. I would suggest to you, everybody knows the Trivago guy, right? So this actor's name is Tim Williams. And I asked our research and data guys if they could actually create a customer subset that would identify people who were in love with Tim Williams and book Trivago because of that. And they told me it was possible. Today, pulling data out of social channels, pulling data from places like Experian, looking at first and third-party data, looking at research like ours that looks at propensity models, you can actually create a subset of people who love Tim Williams and therefore book Trivago. So that's case in point. There are some things that travelers are telling us they will or will not do as a general point of view, and I wanted to share that today. So, for example, everybody's now using social as a form of travel brand currency. We know that. 1 in 4 people admit to posting Facebook pictures of their travel to make their friends jealous. True. Travel is increasingly becoming frenetic. We heard earlier today, it's even with Google launched their new app. We know that people are trying to capture that entire booking process, but 38 different sites to book a leisure trip. It's a frenetic marketplace. Everybody tells us they want to go one place, but very often they go to another. Hawaii, for 20 years in a row, has been the #1 dream destination in our research, and it's a very small percentage of who ultimately travels to Hawaii. Loyalty is being seen in a different way. Not only are suppliers treating loyalty differently today, but consumers see it differently. And we see that across the board in all age cohorts and all travel types. And most insidiously, we absolutely see travel booking patterns changing based on security concerns and based on things like Zika virus. We know, for example, France and Belgium have been hurt very much by what's happened there, and we know for a fact Caribbean and cruises are being hurt a little bit by Zika virus. What are some things travelers are telling us they will not do as a group? Well, they don't behave stereotypically. We've hit that. They're not using OTAs in the same way. So we have just published some research that talks about how the funnel is flipping in the OTA community. You heard Dara say it, maybe not so specifically, but we know that consumers are being trained to move down funnel to do the bookings, and they're moving up funnel to use OTAs as showrooms. So the OTA usage is different than it's been before, and we see that, again, widely adopted. I am not sold on augmented reality travel based on what I'm seeing in the research. Virtual reality maybe, but nobody's telling us they want to use augmented reality. So after those basic things, what I would tell you is you have to dig deeper. You have to look at who your customer is beyond what some of the stereotypes are. This is the idea of what digital looks like at an evolutionary scale, right? So in 1994, we had the displayozoic era, and we've moved through from mobile to native to the use of video, and now I would argue we are in the personalizoic era, where the winners in marketing are harvesting data like you heard in the previous session. They're going to apply that data to offer real-time offers that are relevant, that convert. And I think the marketers who get beyond the stereotypes and really dig into specific behaviors, specific microsegments, and then apply a data-first strategy will be the ones that win going forward. Because I do think sometimes you see something obvious, and if you don't look beyond the obvious, you miss the point entirely. Thank you very much.